The morning sun cast long shadows across the police department's parking lot as the newly appointed police chief walked toward the building. His polished badge caught the light, a symbol of the journey that had brought him here. 25 years ago, he'd started as a rookie officer on these very streets, armed with nothing but determination and a dream to make his community better. The chief wasn't just any officer rising through the ranks. He was making history as the first black police chief in Millbrook's 150-year existence. The weight of this responsibility sat heavily on his shoulders, but his confident stride showed no sign of burden. He'd earned this position the hard way, climbing each rung of the ladder with unwavering dedication. His mind drifted back to his early days on patrol. He remembered the elderly woman who'd bring him hot coffee during cold night shifts, the countless teenagers he'd mentored away from trouble, and even the local shop owners who trusted him with their spare keys. These small moments had shaped his approach to policing, building bridges instead of walls. The department he inherited was facing its own challenges. Crime rates had been climbing in certain neighborhoods, and trust between officers and residents was shaky at best. But the chief had a plan. He'd seen both sides of the badge, the power it gave and the responsibility it demanded. His own experiences had taught him that real change starts with understanding. Walking through the station's halls, he noticed the mix of reactions. Some officers stood a little straighter, offering genuine smiles and respectful nods. Others barely concealed their skepticism, their whispered conversations falling silent as he passed. He understood their uncertainty. Change wasn't easy, especially in a department set in its ways. In his first week, he made it a point to learn everyone's names, from the newest dispatcher to the veteran detectives. He listened to their concerns during briefings, taking mental notes of the department's strengths and weaknesses. His calendar quickly filled with community meetings, school visits, and neighborhood walks. The local media couldn't get enough of the story. From beat cop to top cop, one headline read. But the chief knew headlines didn't solve problems. Actions did. He started implementing changes gradually. First came the community outreach programs, then updated training protocols, and finally, a new system for handling citizen complaints. His approach wasn't just about following procedures, it was about understanding people. When a young officer struggled with a difficult case, the chief shared stories from his own early days. When community leaders voiced concerns, he didn't just listen, he invited them to help shape solutions. Some of his initiatives raised eyebrows. The monthly Coffee with Cops program seemed too casual for some veteran officers. The youth mentorship program took officers away from their regular duties. But slowly, results started showing. Tips from community members increased. Minor disputes were resolved before they escalated. Young people began seeing officers as mentors rather than threats. By the end of his first month, even some of his initial critics had to admit things were changing. Crime statistics were trending downward in troubled areas. Officers reported feeling more connected to their beats. Community feedback was increasingly positive. But the chief knew the real challenges lay ahead. True change takes more than a few successful programs or positive headlines. It requires shifting deep-rooted mindsets and rebuilding trust that had eroded over generations. As he settled into his office that evening, reviewing reports and planning next steps, he couldn't have known that his biggest test, one that would shake the department to its core, was just around the corner. The sun had already set when the police chief decided to head home after a long Sunday at the office. He'd spent hours reviewing community feedback and planning next week's initiatives. His new house in the Oak Ridge neighborhood was just a 15-minute drive away. A quiet area with tree-lined streets and well-maintained homes. He was driving his personal car, a black SUV he'd bought to celebrate his promotion. The vehicle represented years of hard work, but tonight it would become part of a story he never expected to tell. The streets were nearly empty, with only the occasional dog walker or jogger taking advantage of the cool evening air. The flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror caught him by surprise. He'd been driving exactly at the speed limit, making complete stops at every sign, habits ingrained from years of police work. His mind quickly ran through possible reasons for the stop as he carefully pulled over, positioning his car properly just like he'd taught countless others to do. Following the protocol he knew by heart, he kept his hands visible on the steering wheel. The cruiser behind him had two officers inside, both faces he didn't immediately recognize in the dim light. They approached his vehicle from both sides, flashlights sweeping across his windows. "Good evening, sir," the officer at his window said, his tone professional but tense. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. Your vehicle matches a description we're looking for." The chief remained calm, though his heart rate picked up slightly. He'd been on the other side of this scenario hundreds of times, but experiencing it now was different. "I understand, officer. I'm actually the police chief. If you'd like, my credentials are in my coat pocket." The officers exchanged glances, their flashlights still trained on him. "Sir, please keep your hands where they are," the second officer said, his voice carrying an edge of disbelief. "We'll need you to step out of the vehicle." 25 years of law enforcement experience told the chief this stop wasn't standard procedure. He noticed small details, the officer's slightly aggressive stance, their hands hovering near their equipment belts, the way they positioned themselves. Everything about their body language suggested they saw him as a threat. As he carefully opened his door, following their instructions to the letter, he couldn't help but think about all the training sessions he'd led about proper traffic stop procedures. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, the head of the department, being treated like a suspect in his own neighborhood. The streetlights cast long shadows as he stood beside his car, the cool evening air raising goosebumps on his arms. He could see curtains twitching in nearby houses as neighbors noticed the commotion. The same neighbors he'd hoped to invite over for a housewarming party were now watching him being treated like a criminal. "Officers," he said calmly, keeping his movements slow and deliberate, "I know this might be hard to believe, but I'm your police chief. My ID is in my left breast pocket. I'd like to reach for it slowly, if that's okay." The younger officer's flashlight beam stayed fixed on him while his partner radioed in their location and situation. The chief could hear the slight tremor in the officer's voice, a mix of adrenaline and uncertainty. He remembered feeling the same way during his first few traffic stops as a rookie. The situation balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, and this routine stop could turn into tomorrow's headline. As he stood there, hands visible, the chief's mind was already racing ahead to how this moment could transform his department, for better or worse. The next few minutes would change everything, not just for him, but for every officer under his command. As dispatch crackled over the radio with his verification, he knew this wasn't just about one traffic stop anymore. It was about to become a turning point that would test everything he believed about police work, community trust, and the power of leadership to create change. The radio crackled with confirmation of the chief's identity, but the tension in the air didn't immediately dissolve. The younger officer's flashlight beam wavered slightly, and the chief could read the mix of emotions crossing his face: shock, embarrassment, and something deeper that looked like fear. This was the moment that would define not just their relationship, but potentially the future of the entire department. "Sir, we didn't." The officer stammered, finally lowering his flashlight. His partner stood frozen, still processing the reality that they'd just pulled over their own police chief. The chief could hear the faint whir of their body cameras, recording every second of this encounter, preserving a moment that would soon become much more than a simple traffic stop. "Let's all take a deep breath," the chief said, his voice steady and calm. He'd handled countless tense situations over his career, but this one felt different. He wasn't just managing a situation, he was living through something that highlighted every concern he'd tried to address since taking the position. A car drove past slowly, its passengers craning their necks to watch the scene unfold. The chief noticed one of them holding up a phone, likely recording. In today's world, every police interaction could become viral content within hours. But instead of feeling exposed, he saw an opportunity for something meaningful to emerge from this uncomfortable moment. "Officers, I'd like both of you to walk me through your thought process," he said, maintaining his composed demeanor. "What made you decide to pull me over?" He wasn't asking as their superior preparing to discipline them. He was asking as someone genuinely interested in understanding their perspective. The senior of the two officers cleared his throat. "We received reports of suspicious activity in the area, sir. A black SUV was mentioned." His voice trailed off as he realized how weak the justification sounded when spoken aloud. The chief nodded, encouraging him to continue. And what made this vehicle suspicious? The chief pressed gently. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Both officers shifted uncomfortably, their earlier authority melting into self-reflection. A cool breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the distant sound of suburban life. A dog barking, children playing, a door closing. These ordinary sounds highlighted the extraordinary nature of their roadside conference. The chief thought about how many similar scenes had played out on streets across the country, most without the privilege of his position to bring them to a different conclusion. "I want both of you to meet me in my office tomorrow morning," he said finally. "Not for punishment, but for a conversation. What happened here tonight? It's an opportunity for all of us to learn and grow." He watched as relief mixed with apprehension on their faces. The younger officer finally found his voice. "Sir, we should have recognized you. I'm truly sorry about this." But the chief raised his hand gently. "The issue isn't that you didn't recognize me. The issue is bigger than that, and I think you're both starting to understand why." As he prepared to return to his vehicle, the chief noticed more neighbors had gathered on their porches, watching the scene unfold. Tomorrow, this incident would be the talk of the department. Some would see it as embarrassing, others as controversial, but he was already seeing it as something else, a powerful teaching moment that no training manual could have provided. The body cameras were still recording as the officers headed back to their patrol car. The footage would become an essential part of what was to come, not as evidence for discipline, but as a tool for change. The chief watched them drive away, their red taillights disappearing around the corner, knowing that this night would mark the beginning of a transformation in his department. The next morning, word of the traffic stop spread through the department like wildfire. The usual morning buzz of the police station felt different. Conversations stopped when people passed by, only to resume in hushed whispers. The chief could feel the tension as he walked through the hallways, the weight of every glance and unspoken opinion following him to his office. Inside the break room, officers gathered in small groups, their coffee cups serving as props in an increasingly heated discussion. They were just following protocol, one veteran officer argued, stirring his coffee with more force than necessary. "We've all been taught to treat every stop the same way." "But in that neighborhood, at that time?" Another countered, shaking his head. "Let's be honest about what really happened here." The room fell silent as a third officer, who had trained both officers involved in the stop, pushed away from the table and left without a word. The chief sat in his office, reviewing the body camera footage for the third time. Each viewing revealed new details, the subtle shifts in tone, the unconscious positioning, the assumptions that guided every action. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages from other police chiefs across the state, each offering their own mix of sympathy and advice. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. The department's training coordinator stood in the doorway, clutching a thick binder of procedures. "Sir, I've reviewed all our traffic stop protocols. The officers followed every step correctly, by the book." She paused, struggling with the words. "But maybe that's part of the problem." The chief gestured for her to sit down. "The book doesn't always tell the whole story, does it?" he said quietly. They both knew he wasn't just talking about procedure manuals. Years of experience, countless stops, and ingrained habits had created an unwritten book that sometimes spoke louder than any official protocol. Down in the patrol room, the two officers from the previous night sat apart from their colleagues during briefing. Their usual confident postures were replaced with slumped shoulders and downcast eyes. The other officers gave them a wide berth, some out of disapproval, others from not knowing what to say. The chief's secretary appeared at his door again. "Sir, the media's getting wind of this. 3 news stations have called already, and there's buzz on social media." She handed him a printout of a tweet that was gaining traction. "Even a police chief isn't immune. What hope do the rest of us have?" He leaned back in his chair, considering his options. He could handle this quietly, write it off as a simple misunderstanding. That would be the easy path, the one many expected him to take. Protect the department's image, avoid controversy, move on. But as he watched another group of officers arguing in the parking lot through his window, he knew that easy wasn't the same as right. The 2 young officers were due in his office in 10 minutes. As he prepared for their meeting, he thought about his own early days on the force. How many times had he made decisions based on unconscious assumptions? How many times had others done the same to him? This wasn't just about one traffic stop anymore. It was about patterns so deeply woven into the fabric of law enforcement that they'd become nearly invisible. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from the mayor requesting an urgent meeting. The political machinery was starting to turn, but the chief's mind was already set on a different course. This moment of crisis couldn't be handled with press releases and policy memos. It needed something more fundamental, a complete reimagining of what it meant to serve and protect in a complex world. The police chief sat in his dimly lit office well past midnight, surrounded by stacks of reports and data sheets. His computer screen glowed with spreadsheets showing a year's worth of traffic stops. What had started as a response to his own experience had turned into something much bigger. A deep dive into the department's practices that was revealing uncomfortable truths. Numbers don't lie, but they do tell stories. Each spreadsheet row represented a real person, a real moment when someone's day had been interrupted by flashing lights in their rearview mirror. The patterns were becoming clear, and they weren't comfortable to look at. The department's data analyst had helped him break down the numbers, who got stopped, where, and why. In certain neighborhoods, the stop rates were significantly higher. The reasonable suspicion justifications showed troubling patterns. Even more concerning were the follow-up actions, who got searched, who received warnings, and who got tickets. "This can't be right," one senior sergeant said, reviewing the preliminary findings. "We're just following crime patterns, responding to calls." But the chief pushed a map across the table showing reported crime locations overlaid with traffic stop data. The mismatch was obvious, even to the most skeptical eyes. He brought in an outside expert, a researcher who specialized in analyzing police data. She sat with the command staff, walking them through national trends and comparing them with their local numbers. Some officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others took furious notes. A few just stayed out the window, arms crossed. The chief decided to dig deeper. He pulled body camera footage randomly from stops over the past year. Late into the night, he watched interaction after interaction. The differences were subtle but unmistakable: the tone of voice, the benefit of doubt given or withheld, the speed with which situations escalated. One young officer came to his office voluntarily, visibly troubled by what the data was showing. I'd always believed I treated everyone the same," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the numbers, they're making me question every stop I've ever made." The investigation wasn't just about gathering data, it was about understanding the human story behind each number. The chief set up anonymous feedback channels for both officers and community members. Stories poured in. Some were angry, others sad, many simply resigned to a system they'd never trusted. In the break room, conversations had shifted from defending current practices to asking harder questions. Officers were bringing in their own patrol data, comparing notes, challenging each other's assumptions. The two officers from that fateful traffic stop had become unexpected allies in the process, sharing their experience openly with colleagues. Social media was buzzing with news of the investigation. Some praised the transparency, while others accused the department of overreacting to a single incident. The chief knew the truth lay somewhere in between. This wasn't an overreaction to one night, but rather a long overdue recognition of patterns that had been there all along. The mayor called again, concerned about potential backlash. This could open up a can of worms, he warned. The chief looked at the photo on his wall, his first day as a rookie officer, young and idealistic. "Sometimes," he replied, "those worms need to see the light of day." As he compiled the final report, the chief realized this investigation had become more than just a response to his own experience. It was a mirror forcing everyone, himself included, to look at their reflections honestly. The question now wasn't just what the data showed, but what they would do with these uncomfortable truths. The training room was packed. Officers filled every seat, lined the walls, and spilled into the hallway. The air felt heavy with anticipation as the chief stepped to the front. Behind him, a large screen showed a frozen frame from his traffic stop. A moment that had sparked a revolution in his department. "Today, we're doing something different," he began, his voice firm but understanding. "We're not here to point fingers or assign blame. We're here to learn from each other." He pressed play, and the room fell silent as they watched the incident unfold from multiple body camera angles. The The chief had designed this training himself, combining his personal experience with the data they'd gathered. Instead of the usual PowerPoint slides and policy manuals, they used real footage, real stories, and real numbers. When the video ended, he turned to the two officers from that night. "Would you share what was going through your minds?" Their honest reflections opened the floodgates. Other officers began sharing their own experiences, times they'd made snap judgments, moments they regretted, situations that had made them question their training. The room that had started with tense silence transformed into a space for open dialogue. The new training program wasn't just about watching videos. Officers partnered with community members for role-playing exercises, switching roles to experience both sides of police interactions. They reviewed their own body camera footage in small groups, analyzing decision points and discussing alternatives. "It's like learning to be a cop all over again," one veteran officer admitted during a break. "But this time, we're seeing the whole picture." The chief overheard this and smiled. That was exactly what he hoped for. The program tackled uncomfortable topics head-on. They discussed implicit bias not as an accusation, but as a human reality that everyone needed to acknowledge and address. Officers shared stories of times they'd been profiled themselves, breaking down the walls between personal experience and professional duty. Technology played a key role. The department developed a new system for reviewing traffic stops, not just for policy compliance, but for tone, approach, and decision-making. Officers could request feedback on their interactions, creating a culture of continuous improvement rather than punishment. The two officers from the chief's traffic stop became unexpected leaders in the training program. Their willingness to examine their actions openly earned them respect from both colleagues and community members. "We could have lost our jobs," the younger one said during a session. "Instead, we gained understanding." Community involvement grew as word spread about the changes. Local residents volunteered to participate in training scenarios, sharing their perspectives and experiences. The conversations weren't always easy, but they were always real. One afternoon, during a particularly intense session, an older officer raised his hand. "I've been doing this job for 20 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Today is the first time I truly understood what it means to serve everyone equally." The room fell quiet, absorbing the weight of his words. The mayor, who had initially worried about negative publicity, now regularly brought other city officials to observe the training. "This isn't just about policing," he told reporters. "It's about building a better community." The program was becoming a model for other departments, proof that meaningful change was possible. As the chief watched another group working through scenarios, he realized they'd created something more than just a training program. They'd built a space for honest conversation, personal growth, and real transformation. The incident that could have divided them had instead become the foundation for unity and change. 1 year after that fateful traffic stop, the police chief stood at a podium during a national law enforcement conference. The room was filled with police leaders from across the country, all eager to hear about the transformation that had made headlines and changed lives. Behind him, a screen displayed the department's latest statistics. Traffic stop numbers showed no racial disparities for the first time in recorded history. Complaint rates had dropped by 60%. Most importantly, crime rates had decreased while community trust scores reached record highs. "This isn't just about numbers," the chief began, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "It's about people. It's about trust. It's about turning a moment of potential crisis into an opportunity for real change." He clicked to the next slide, showing a photo of a community barbecue where officers and residents chatted over plates of food. "Today, our officers don't just patrol neighborhoods. They're part of them. When they make a traffic stop, they approach each car with awareness, respect, and genuine concern for public safety." The two officers from that night sat in the front row. They'd become instrumental in implementing the new training program, their story serving as a powerful reminder that change was possible. Their presence at the conference wasn't about shame or guilt, it was about growth and transformation. A local teenager had recently posted a video that went viral. It showed one of their officers helping a stranded motorist change a tire in the rain. The comment section was filled with stories from community members sharing their positive experiences with the department. "A year ago, these stories wouldn't have existed," the chief noted. The department's training program had been adopted by 30 other police departments nationwide. Each week brought requests from law enforcement agencies wanting to learn more. The incident that could have been a career-ending embarrassment had instead sparked a movement. During the question and answer session, a police chief from another state raised his hand. "Weren't you worried about morale? About pushback from your officers?" The chief smiled, remembering the initial tension. "Change isn't easy," he admitted. "But when officers see real results, when they experience the difference in their daily interactions, they become its biggest supporters." Back home, the evidence of change was everywhere. Officers regularly attended community events, not as security, but as participants. Local schools invited them for career days. The department's social media showed photos of positive interactions, each one a small victory in rebuilding trust. The mayor, once worried about controversy, now proudly showcased the department as an example of progressive policing. Other cities sent delegations to observe their training sessions. The local news ran a series titled "Building Bridges," highlighting the positive changes in police-community relations. One evening, while driving through the same neighborhood where he'd been stopped a year ago, the chief noticed something different. People waved at passing patrol cars. Children played freely in their front yards. Officers walked their beats with easy confidence, stopping to chat with residents. As he concluded his conference speech, the chief shared one final thought. That night could have ended differently. It could have been just another statistic, just another headline. Instead, it became a catalyst for change. We proved that when we have the courage to face uncomfortable truths and the wisdom to learn from them, we can create something better. Not just for our department, but for every community we serve. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for him. It was for every officer, every community member, and every person who believed that change was possible. The story of one traffic stop had become a blueprint for transformation, proving that even the most challenging moments could lead to the most meaningful progress.